Start recording. Okay, so let's talk about the skin. All right. First of all, our skin, all right, that covers our body is an organ. Believe it or not, did you know it's the largest organ in the body? Some of you may have heard that. Okay. It does have another name. We call it the cutaneous membrane. There's 4 types of membranes in the body. We already learned the first one. Remember the serous membrane, the 2 layers, the parietal layer and the visceral layer. All right, that's a serous membrane, and that is the membrane that covers most of the body cavities in your body and the organs inside those body cavities. Okay. Well, the cutaneous membrane is the second of the 4 membranes in our body here. Okay, and it's made up of 2 layers. All right, an outer layer, which is the epidermis, and that is made up, and you need to know this, the epidermis is made up strictly of epithelium. Okay, epithelium. One of the characteristics, and I know we haven't covered this, and we will in lecture class when we get to the tissue chapter. All right, one of the characteristics of epithelium is that it's avascular. What does that mean, avascular? It means it has no blood vessels. A meaning without. Okay, so epithelium does not have any blood vessels within it. Okay, so can we not say then that the epidermis is avascular since it's made up of epithelial tissue? All right, there's no blood vessels in the epithelial. There's no blood vessels in epithelial tissue. And there's no blood vessels in the epidermis. Okay. The second layer is called the dermis. That's the deeper layer, and it's the thicker layer. Okay, so let's jump in here and talk about the epidermis, the outer layer. Okay, so a couple things you need to understand. The epidermis has 4 to 5, actually 5 sublayers. We call those strata. Okay, so skin is made up of 2 layers, epidermis and the dermis. And then when we get into the epidermis, we break that down into 5 strata or sublayers there. The majority of our epidermis is made up of this type of epithelium. Stratified squamous epithelium. What's stratified mean? Remember stratified? Strata is referring to layers, so if it's stratified, it's going to be made up of 2 or more cell layers. Someone just said it. Layer. Yep, that's right. Laney, that's good. So stratified squamous epithelium has 2 or more cell layers thick. All right? And do you remember what keratin is? Keratin. Keratin is a protein, and I'll talk about it more, that these cells will make to make the cell stronger. But unfortunately, when it makes the keratin, that process kills the cell. Okay? All right. So here are the 5 layers. The first layer is the deepest layer. So we call that the Stratum Basale. Now listen, that's how I pronounce it. And I pronounce it like that phonetically so you know that there's a silent E at the end. Technical way to, I don't want you guys to think I'm an idiot. All right, but the proper way to pronounce it is Stratum Basale. Okay, but remember, basilar surface is the bottom layer. B basal, B bottom. Okay, so what you're seeing here is this Stratum Basale is the bottom layer. Okay, and then the top layer is this guy right here, the Stratum Corneum. Okay, so what this is saying is that these first 3 layers here, all right, all the cells there are living, but in layers 4 and 5, the stratum lucidum and the stratum corneum, those cell layers are dead. All right, and I'll talk about that process here. And that has to do with the keratin. All right, so the cells start to produce the keratin, and as they're producing the keratin, they're moving into different layers. All right, and then by the time they reach a certain layer, okay, then that cell has successfully killed itself, but at the same time, it's filled itself up with keratin, and it's made itself stronger. All right, so let's start off with the deepest layer, the Stratum Basale. Okay, this layer is the first layer in your epidermis, right? And it's 1 layer thick. Okay, one of the things that I should have mentioned, and I will mention it when we get into the tissues, okay? When we're talking about stratified epithelium, let me see if I got the picture here. I do. All right. When we're talking about stratified epithelium, all right, if we look here at our picture, all right, this is the epithelium, this is the epidermis, okay? Now look at the cells here. See this first layer here, right here? That's the stratum basale. What shape of this are the cells there? Cuboidal, right? Or what you might consider what they call low columnar. It's kind of in the middle of a cuboid and a columnar cell, all right? But would you not agree that those kind of look like square-like, all right, or rectangular? But as we get to the top here, look at the cells now. They look more flattened, right? Like a squamous. So this is important that you know this, right? When we name stratified epithelium, we always name it for the apical layer, the top layer. And there's a lot of rules. It's crazy. All right? So we don't name it for the bottom layer because obviously this layer looks to be cuboidal or low columnar. But when we get to the upper layers and the top layer, they're all flattened. Okay? So if you recall, all right, the epidermis, all right, is made up of stratified squamous epithelium, and we call it squamous because the top layer is flattened. Okay, so you name it after the apical layer. Don't forget that. Okay, so back to the stratum basale. All right, this layer, all right, is one layer thick. Okay, and the cells are anywhere from cuboidal to what we call low columnar, or what I just showed you in that picture. Okay, and there's three types of cells, all right, that are going to be found in the stratum basale. The most common and abundant, the predominant cell type are the keratinocytes. Okay, but there's two other types: the melanocytes, all right, and we'll talk about what they do here in a moment. They make melanin, which gives our skin its pigmentation, its color. All right, and then we have tactile cells. Tactile means touch. Okay, these cells are touch sensitive. All right, they're very similar to a nerve cell. They are not a nerve cell, but they're similar. Okay. All right. So let's talk about the first one here, the most common and the most abundant, the keratinocytes. All right. This cell type we're going to find in all of the layers of the epidermis, all those strata. All right, so the stratum basale, the stratum spinosum, the stratum granulosum, the stratum lucidum, and the stratum corneum. All right, it's found in all of those layers there. All right, think of them as stem cells. So what does a stem cell do? It divides. Okay, it divides, and when it divides, so where you had one cell, now we have two. Okay, so what will happen is, right, when one of these cells divides, all right, and now we have two cells, one of those cells will stay in this layer, and the other one will move to the next layer, which is the stratum spinosum. Okay? So keep that in mind. Once the cell divides, one stays, the other one's got to go. Okay? And the one that goes will eventually move on to make keratin. The one that stays is going to divide again. Okay? So there's that keratin. Its job is to strengthen, build up the integrity of our epidermis. All right, good so far. We'll get into a little bit more detail on keratinocytes, but keep that in mind. All right, they're the most abundant. All right, their job is to make keratin. Their job is to make our skin strong. Okay? All right, the next type of cell that we see in this layer are the melanocytes. Okay, now they're not going to be as abundant, so they're going to be scattered throughout this cell layer here. All right, but what I love about these cells is they produce one of my favorite, all right, substances in the body, melanin. And that's, you know, they say you always want what you don't have. All right? I'm a ginger. I have very little, I burn easily, I don't tan, I have very little melanin, okay? So, all right, melanin is awesome because one, it protects our cells from cancer, okay? Predominantly, it protects your DNA from cancer. Well, so to speak. Here's what happens. Ultraviolet radiation from the sun hits these cells, okay? What will happen is, all right, they'll produce the melanin, and then the cell that they share and care. So they're going to share the melanin to all the neighboring cells around them. And those cells will take the melanin and they'll put it over the nucleus. Okay? And we haven't talked about the nucleus yet. But the nucleus is like the control center for our cell. But that's where all our DNA is stored. All right? That's our genetic, that's our map. That's the blueprint that makes us us. Okay? That's the blueprint that gives me red hair or makes me 6'1". All right, that's all that information is stored there, so it protects it. Because what happens is, if all right, the DNA is exposed to ultraviolet radiation, is anyone here taking a genetic course? It undergoes a process called dimerization, and what that does is it splits and splices DNA. Start splicing DNA, you got a problem, because then you're going to start to make bad proteins, because that's how your cell knows to make the proteins. It has the blueprint. It's like the instruction manual. All right, I want to make insulin. How do I do it? No problem. We go into the DNA and it's imprinted on the chromosomes there, and we can make insulin. This is what happens every time. All right, so we got to protect that, and that's what happens. That's what melanin does. It shields our DNA from that ultraviolet radiation, so it doesn't splice our DNA. All right. It's really cool. I'd get into it more, but I don't want to bore you. All right. All right. So the last type of cell in this layer are the tactile cells, otherwise known as Merkel cells. That was the scientist that discovered these cells. Okay. And again, much like the melanocytes, they're scattered throughout. All right, this layer. Okay. But they are touch sensitive. So when you touch something, all right, these cells will release these neurotransmitter or chemicals, and those chemicals will stimulate a nearby receptor cell or neuron. And that neuron will then transmit that information up to your brain or your spinal cord. Right? It's really cool. Okay, but it's for light touch. We'll talk about these cells in chapter 16 at the end of the semester. Okay, but for now, just know that they're touch sensitive. All right, let's talk about the second layer, okay? All right, so now the next layer up is the stratum spinosum. And so remember I was telling you when those keratinocytes divide, one stays in that one cell layer, the other one migrates into the next layer, all right? So these keratinocytes are what we call polygonal, which is just this goofy shape. It's just an oddly shaped cell. It's not quite squamous shaped, and it's not quite cuboidal or low columnar shaped. It's kind of in between, all right? So these cells now have just moved into this layer. So now they're going to start forming relationships with neighboring cells, all right? They're going to start to attach themselves, all right? Because if you think about it, you know, when you take a bath or a shower, you ever notice if you take a really long bath, your skin is wrinkly, all right? That just tells us that our skin is water resistant. It isn't waterproof. If it was waterproof, you wouldn't get wrinkly, right? But it's water resistant. And what helps keep it water resistant is when these cells, all right, are in these layers, they start to form these structures here, desmosomes, right, and intercellular junctions. And basically, what it is these cells start sewing themselves together. So there's no space. Remember, epithelium, the cells are tightly packed. There's no space in between the cells. Right? And so now that there's really no space in between the cells, well, now there's even less space, if there was any space, because they're actually sewing themselves together. So they take two pieces of cloth, sewing them together. Now there's no space in between those pieces of cloth. And that's what happens here. All right? Now you're going to run into these cool cells, the Langerhans cells or the epidermal dendritic cells. And these are white blood cells, all right, or a form of white blood cell. All right, they're not the kind that are going to be flowing through your blood, all right, like lymphocytes or neutrophils. All right, but they're what we call resident cells. All right, they live here in this layer. All right, and what they do is they look over the cells that are close to them in their vicinity and make sure that they're okay, that they're not expressing any weird behavior, okay, or expressing any weird cell identity markers like cancer will do. All right, and if a neighboring cell does exhibit some cancer-like tendencies, these guys kill it. These are the cells that are responsible, because I can guarantee almost every single one of you has had, I won't say skin cancer because people freak out when I say that, but the possibility of, if it got out of control, of having skin cancer at least once in your life, but these cells nip it in the bud, all right? The possibility, okay? Cancer goes through a bunch of different stages before a cell goes through a bunch of different stages before it becomes cancerous. And these cells help to nip that in the bud, okay? All right, so you'll see it in the stratum spinosum, the second layer, and even in the third layer, the granulosum, all right? So they initiate, when we talk, and you'll talk about this in 211, when we talk about initiating the immune response, because they might come across a pathogen. It could be a virus, it could be a parasite, it could be whatever, all right? And then they have a role that's called APC, which is known as an antigen-presenting cell. So they're like that little kid, for those of you that are parents, and if it's ever happened where one of your children walks over to you with something they shouldn't have in their hand, maybe like dog poop or something, you know, and that's what these APC cells are like. They find something like, ooh, and they want to show it to a white blood cell, like, hey, I found this, right? And there's a process that they do it. They actually eat it, and then they digest it, and then put it all over their body. That's essentially what these cells do. So they'll go up to a white blood cell, like, hey, look, I found this. Is this good or bad? And if it's bad, the white blood cells, nope, you're done, and we start an immune response. Really neat. All right, third layer, the stratum granulosum, okay? Not a very thick layer, right? But this, the important aspect of this layer is this is where keratinization occurs, okay? Or I shouldn't say occurs, that's where it starts, all right? It starts in that layer. Now it's a process, so that means it's going to take a little bit of time. All right, but as that cell is synthesizing and making the keratin and it's putting it into the cytoplasm, all right, and it's making more and more of it, that process starts to kill off the other organelles in the cell, and it can kill off the nucleus. Once that's gone, once the nucleus is no longer around and the organelles are gone, it's dead. The cell is considered to be dead, which is fine. I mean, when you look at your skin, you're looking at dead cells. I'm looking at all your dead cells. You're looking at my dead cells. All right, that's what happened because, all right, the keratinization process has killed, all right, the nucleus and the organelles inside. Okay? All right, so keep that in mind. This is the third layer, the granulosum layer, and that's where this process begins. All right? All right, moving into the fourth layer, this is a very special layer because it is only found in thick skin. Thick. And there's two places for thick skin. Your palms of your hands and the soles of your feet. Everywhere else on your body is thin skin. Okay? So if you know where thick is, then it's easy, and then you just process of elimination. All right, thin skin is everywhere else. So your palms of your hands, the soles of your feet have thick. All right, that means that those areas have this layer. Does the tip of your nose have stratum lucidum on it? How about the back of your hands? How about on the back of your calf? Right, good. Okay, good. All right. All right. So one of the things that the book mentions is this lead-in, and basically a lead-in is an intermediate protein in the keratinization process. So along the way of making keratin, all right, the cell makes a lead-in, all right, before we get the final keratin product. All right, and again, this is a thin layer too. It's only 2 to 3 cell layers thick. Okay? Like the granulosum, that was 3 to 5 cell layers thick, not too thick. Now we come up onto the thickest one of all 5 layers. This is the outer layer. So I essentially am looking at your stratum corneum. All right? All right? You're holding somebody, you're holding hands with their stratum corneum. I know it does that sometimes. All right? So this layer can be up to 30 layers thick, but every single cell is dead because keratin. Every single cell is tightly packed or connected to one another. All right? They're fully keratinized. Okay? And remember, one of the functions of stratified epithelium is protection. So you'll find this type of epithelium in places that undergo mechanical stress. Okay? So in this case, all right, this layer here, all right, is going to protect us against abrasion, brushing, and infection. All right, you've got bacteria living all over your skin right now. It's trying to find a way in. Cut yourself, that's a perfect way in. Okay? But it's trying. It's not going to stop. All right? But the fact that you have these cells that are dead and that they're tightly packed with one another because they're interlocking helps to decrease your chances of infection. All right, there's a couple other things that we'll talk more about lecture when we get into the skin. All right, but I think it's a good time here. Let me just show you a quick picture here. All right, this drawing on the right is showing you all the cell layers. Okay, and this is an actual microscopic or histologic slide here of your epidermis. Okay, this is actually thick skin. This is the stratum corneum here, and it's several cell layers thick. All right, so let's take a break and do some labeling. Yep. Correct. Yep. And I'll just quickly show you a picture of thin skin. Here is thick skin. You can see the stratum corneum here, and then here's thin skin. Look how thin, all right, your stratum corneum is in thin skin. Very, very, very thin. All right, that'd be like the back of your hands, your scalp, your face. Okay. This right here would be on the soles of your feet or the palms of your hand. All right, let's jump into, I'll stop there and we'll do our labeling. All right, so grab out your atlas, okay, and let's get into the integument. All right, so this first slide here is showing you, on our model here, okay, the difference of the epidermis in thick and thin skin. Okay, so over here, where I have my little pointer, that is going to be thick skin because this outer layer, you can see how many cells are in the outer corneum, stratum corneum layer here, compared to the epidermis over here. You can see how thin that is. Another way to tell the difference between thick and thin skin is, you look at the palms of your hand. I don't know how easy it is for you to look at the soles of your feet, but do you see any hair on the palms of your hand? I hope not. All right. But thick skin does not have hair. If it does not have hair, right, it's going to be missing some certain glands, and we'll get into that here. All right, not today. Okay, so here's the epidermis. You're seeing, all right, the difference between thick and thin. Let's talk about the 5 layers of the epidermis. The first layer, the outermost layer, that's the stratum corneum here. Okay. That is the outer layer there. 20 to 30 cell layers thick. Okay. Now, if we are in thick skin, the next layer, now, if you look up here on the screen, does that look like a white line to you? What color does it look like in your book? Yeah, I know. Doesn't matter what color it is, all right? But this yellow line in your atlas, that's the stratum lucidum. But if you notice, yeah, and I think that just over time with the publisher, that's just what happened. If you notice, you see that yellow line in your book here, but you don't see it over here. Okay? Because this is thick skin and this is thin skin. All right, that's the stratum lucidum, 2 to 3 cell layers thick. Then just below it, 3 to 5 cell layers thick, is the stratum granulosum. This is where keratinization starts to occur. All right, that's I don't know what color that looks like in your book, but it's just like this dark purple or black line. Okay, that's the stratum granulosum. The next layer deep is the stratum spinosum. All right, this is where those keratinocytes that just got done dividing in the first layer move into this layer here. All right, we'll have some of those dendritic cells there, those immune cells I was talking about. That's the stratum spinosum, right in through here. I think it's kind of a brownish color. And then finally, the last layer that we're going to talk about, the deepest layer of your epidermis, is the stratum basale, or stratum basale. And that's being represented by this black and yellow line. If you look here, let me zoom in. It's this right here. I don't know what color that looks like to you, but this layer here. Okay? All right, that's the first layer of your skin, the epidermis. Epithelial tissue, which means all the cells are tightly packed. All right? There's really no extracellular matrix there, and they're avascular, no blood vessels. If you look on the model, there's no little blood vessels in here. These little red and blue dots, those represent blood vessels. Okay? Do you see any of it here? Nope. Okay, good. I have a good feeling about this class. I have a very good feeling. All right. The next layer of your skin is the dermis. The dermis begins with a D. This is the deeper layer. Okay? Your skin has 2 layers, the epidermis and the dermis. Think of the dermis as the layer that has all the stuff in it. All right, your skin has, all right, all the tissue types. Remember, perfect, great segue. Does anybody know the 4 tissue types of the body? Kind of, sort of, there's 4. Yeah, I know you should know at least 2 of them. Were you thinking of muscles? Muscles is 1. You said connective? Okay, so we got connective tissue, muscle tissue. Yeah, and then, well, skeletal is part of the muscle, and nervous. So she had nervous up there. So we've got connective tissue, muscle tissue, nervous tissue, and then what tissue is the epidermis made of? Epithelium. Yep. Those are your 4 tissue types. You need to know that. Okay? Make sure you know it. Epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, nervous tissue. So this layer, or not this layer, well, yeah, technically it does, but anyway, the skin has all 4 tissue types in it. Okay? All 4 tissue types. Okay? So this is the dermis here. Move to the next one. All right, here you can see it on this model here. All right, so now, and I know we didn't cover this yet, but now we're going to break down the dermis into 2 layers, 2 sublayers. Okay? So the first sublayer, or division of the layers, this is the more superficial. This is the layer that connects directly to the epidermis. This layer is what we call the papillary layer. You don't have to write dermal papillary layer. Papillary layer is fine. Okay? It's the dermal, I know it says dermal papillary layer, but okay? So as you can see here, all right, the papillary layer has these little kind of like bumps or ridges in it. Okay, it's the smaller of the 2 layers of the dermis. Okay, the layer that's deeper to it is called the reticular layer. That's the larger of the 2 layers. Okay, so you can call that, if you want to call it the dermal reticular layer, fine, or you can just call it the reticular layer. Okay, that's the deeper of the 2. All right, So going back to that first layer of the dermis, the papillary layer, all right, those bumps that I was telling you about, all right, those are called the dermal papillae. Okay, a papillae is a bump. All right, and so we just named this bump after where it's located in your dermis. All right, and so it makes direct contact with, you don't have this slide if you're looking, all right, but it makes direct contact with the epidermis, okay? And so the epidermis, if you look here, you notice, you can see how the epidermis has these bumps going downwards? All right, you guys know the difference between stalagmites and stalactites? You know what they are? You ever been in a cave and you got these big spiky things coming down from the ceiling, and some caves are coming up from the ground? I cannot remember which is which, all right? And so that was my train of thought, because my son asked me and I couldn't remember. Think of this, though, all right, similar to the stalagmites and stalactites, okay? So you've got these bumps coming down from the epidermis, and then from the dermis, all right, the papillary layer, you have these bumps going up, okay? So you got the bumps coming down, and that's coming from the epidermis. Then you got the bumps coming up, and they interlock with one another, okay? And that interlocking is what gives us our fingerprints, okay? We'll talk about that in lecture. All right. So in these papillae here, you've got blood vessels, okay? So those are referred to as the papillary plexus. All right, so you can kind of see it a little bit better over here. Here's one. All right, here's another one. All right, that's what that black and yellow circle is trying to depict. All right, those blood vessels there. Because remember, epithelial tissue is avascular. Our epidermis does not have a blood supply. Blood brings nutrients to the cells. Well, don't you think those cells in the epidermis deserve and need nutrients? So we got to get our blood vessels as close, all right, to that epithelium and that epidermis as possible. And that's what these, the papillary plexus do. All right. Now, this last layer that you see here, known as the subcutaneous layer or the hypodermis, we talk about it when we talk about the skin, but it is not, I repeat, it is not part of the skin. It's a great true-false question. I think every semester it's on the test. All right? It'll say something that the subcutaneous layer is part of the integument. The answer is false. All right? It has another name called the hypodermis. It's not part of the integument. Don't be fooled. We just talk about it because while we're talking about the skin, it's hard not to talk about this layer here. Okay? So we lump it in. Okay? In this, if you look here, there's lots of yellow in the subcutaneous layer or the hypodermis. That's because it's loaded with adipocytes or adipose tissue. Okay? And as we know, adipose tissue is a great place to store lipids, which are great for energy, which are great for cushioning and insulation. Okay? All right. Next is the nervous tissue. Remember, I told you the skin has nervous tissue in it. Okay? So this white structure right here, okay, that is referred to, oh, I made it too big. That is what's known as a Meissner's corpuscle or tactile corpuscle. There you go. Now you can see everything. Okay, and that's close to the surface of the skin, so it picks up on touch. Okay, light touch. Meissner's corpuscle or tactile corpuscle. All right, it's up to you. Either or is fine. All right. Now it's tough to see here. Well, actually, it's not tough to see. I'll zoom in. This right here is what we call that's a free. All right, that's a free nerve ending. All right, and what is that I'm looking at? I'll have to cut off the word here. Right here. See that white kind of line that's coming up from the dermis and then it goes out into the epidermis? All right, that's a free nerve ending. What's a free nerve ending? Pain receptor. It's one of the things that it does. Okay? We call it free nerve ending because there's no capsule on top of it. Okay? The nerve endings are just hanging out there. All right, there's one all the way over here. All right. I think I already showed you guys this one. Yeah, that's, oh, sorry. I was like, wait a minute, I've already showed you that. This is just on a different model, all right? Here's the Meissner's corpuscle or the tactile corpuscle on the actual skin model that we've been using. I almost confused myself there. Okay. So now our last nervous structure is way down here, and this is called a Pacinian corpuscle or a lamellated corpuscle. Lamina means layered, so lamellated means it's a layered corpuscle. You just have, all right, this connective tissue over the actual nerve itself, or the ending to that nerve, or the nerve terminal, and it just has all these layers here, like an onion. The ogres, you know that ogres have layers? Okay, so the Pacinian corpuscle or lamellated corpuscle, again, it's another touch receptor. All right, all these different corpuscles that I just went over, we'll learn in more detail in chapter 16. So more on that later. All right, so the next slide is going to show us another tissue type that's present in the skin. All right, the only muscle that you have to know in your skin is the erector pili muscle. Okay, pili means hair. Okay, so this muscle, if you look closely, it's directly attached to the hair follicle. Okay, and this is the muscle that gives us goosebumps, or in some literature, it's referred to as goose flesh. Okay, and that's a reaction that your body undergoes to help keep you warm. Or if your sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight or flight part of your nervous system or your body, being chased by a bear or something, all right, it will stimulate that. Okay, that's the erector pili muscle. All right, now let's talk about glands. All right, you've got 3 glands here in your skin. The first one here is the apocrine gland. Okay. These glands are predominantly present in areas, all right, like your armpit, all right, the axillary region, all right, your pubic region. Okay, and these glands really don't become active until puberty, and they're affiliated, all right, with hair. So if you follow the gland here, and this is the duct, you can see, all right, that right by the duct here is a little hair. Okay. So apocrine glands, you're going to find them where there's hair. So if you don't have any hair on the palms of your hands, are you going to find apocrine glands there? No. Or the bottoms of your feet. Okay, but you will find this type of gland, a merocrine gland. These glands are everywhere, all over your body, on the soles of your feet and the palms of your hand. These types of glands make like the watery sweat that you get when it's too hot outside. Okay. So if you notice, these glands aren't affiliated with hair. If you follow the duct all the way up, there's no hair here at the top. Now this one here, if you look, all right, that's American gland. There just so happens to be a hair there. That's only because it just, if you look at the top of it, it's nowhere in the vicinity. But all these other ones, you can see here's another American gland in our thick skin here. Okay, but there's no hair. All right, and the third type of gland, okay, these glands are associated only with hair. All right, this is the sebaceous gland. This is the gland that sits right on top of the hair follicle, and it gives off the secretion. It's called sebum. And sebum is a viscous, oily type of secretion. So like hair, like I got a 13-year-old son, all right, doesn't take a shower as much as I'd love him to. You can definitely tell when it's been he's not that bad when it's been a few days, but you know, there's been a few times, but you can see his hair gets greasy, and that's the sebum, okay? It's on there. I'm not going to tell you who, but I have a family member that when they wash their hair, when they take a shower, they won't wash their hair but once a week because they don't want to lose the sebum, because they're convinced, and I've had many discussions with them, it's interesting at Thanksgiving time, but they're convinced that if they wash the sebum out of their hair, that it's going to damage their hair. Each their own. Who am I? All right, so this next slide is pointing to the hair that is above your skin. If you see the hair above the skin on the outside, we refer to that as the hair shaft. If we're underneath the skin, we give it a different name. I'll show you that here. Okay? So as you can tell, the arrow is above the skin, all right? So that's the hair shaft. All right? When we're underneath the skin, we call that the hair root. Okay? Hair shaft is above the skin, hair root is below. All right, almost done. Just got to wrap up the hair. All right, so at the base of our hair structure, the hair follicle, where it kind of, if you've ever planted flowers, right, at the bottom, especially if they're potted flowers, right, at the bottom of some, like tulips, for example, they have a bulb. Okay, your hair, which is an expansion at the bottom portion here, so it looks something like this. All right, where that expands hair, that's the hair bulb, and that's what we're seeing down here. Okay, and the center portion at the bottom of that hair bulb, all right, you've got the hair papillae. If you look closer at the hair papillae, you see blood vessels. Okay, much like the papillary plexus that we saw up in the reticular layer, okay? Here, all right, the hair papillae, we are seeing, all right, blood vessels, okay? Now, just above that hair papillae there, all right, this area is where we have cells rapidly undergoing division, okay? Because remember, hair grows out, right? From our skin, it moves out, okay? So these cells are rapidly dividing. It's right above the hair papillae. That's called the hair matrix. So as these cells are rapidly dividing, the older cells get pushed towards the surface, upwards, outwards. Okay? So where all that division is going on, that's the hair matrix. Okay? And if you look at me and notice how I'm dressed today, I am wearing a long sleeve shirt. Okay? So that's it. No, I'm just kidding. The purpose of me saying that is because that's what the hair follicle is. The hair follicle are the sleeves of my shirt. Okay, my arm is the hair, and then the hair follicle surrounds the hair. All right, my shirt is the hair follicle because it surrounds my arm. Okay, so that's what this is representing. All right, you cut through the hair follicle. So this black yellow line is representing the hair follicle. Okay, like a letter in an envelope. Okay, the envelope surrounds the letter. Okay, so the hair follicle surrounds the hair. And here you can see the hair follicle looks like a purplish gray structure that surrounds the hair underneath the skin. And that's it. Ooh, not bad, not bad. So, good news is we have covered all the material for lab identification for your first lab test. Okay, so I will not be introducing any more new identification material for you. Okay, so what's today? Today is Thursday. So a week from today, I believe, is your lab test. I want to say it's the 29th. All right, you had your course. Yeah, today is Thursday. So you have your So that should be a week from today. So you have when I say you have plenty of time, I know it never feels like there's plenty of time. All right, but you do have a week from today to take the test. Okay, so it's really important that you take advantage of this weekend, except on Sunday, 6:30, watch the Buffalo Bills win. But then after that, it's all good. But take advantage of the Quizlets, okay, and the mock exams. So when you really want to test your knowledge, do that, and I would say do it over the weekend. Yes, ma'am. Right. For example, we're not covering chapter 3, so in this semester. Okay. So you won't find, if you go to that, I don't even think the chapter folder's on Blackboard anymore. But if you go there, there won't be a mock exam. Yeah. It's only, and plus, chapter 10 is the muscle chapter that we use in lecture, but all the muscle identifications in chapter 11. Okay, so you would go to chapter 11 and look at the mock exams if you want to do muscles. Yes, ma'am.
They can't see it in the lab. Is stratum and is not completely for the stratum basale? I don't see that. I don't think I didn't see it.
Let me go back to, which one are you talking about, the stratum granulosum?
Yeah. I can see it in your slide, but I can't see it.
Oh, you can't see it very well. Yeah, trust me. When you for the test, you can draw it in there a little bit. Just know it's, again, I take a pen and maybe draw it underneath the stratum lucidum there, and in the thick skin, and in the thin skin, you might want to fill in a little bit below the stratum corneum, just so you know where it's located in both thick and thin.
And then what was the layer
Underneath the stratum stratum spinosum, right over here. This kind of, I don't know what color it looks like to y'all. Brown for me on the screen here.
That's the thick.
I'm sorry?
That's the thicker.
Yep, that's the thicker layer. So who was it? Someone at home asked, Michael asked, are the lab tests just labeling? No. 75% to about 80% of the test will be labeling, and then there will be some true-false multiple choice questions on the lab exam. Okay, there will be some, so you're still responsible for that. You got it. Any other questions?
If you have the lab manual, what purpose does that serve? Because it's just, you open it up and it just has words.
Right.
And numbers.
That gives you all the terms that you're responsible for, the correct spelling of them, and it just provides you with, if you want to take notes, you know, like for example, stratum granulosum is going to be 3 to 5 cell layers thick. If you want to do that.
Okay.
Yeah. Alrighty. That being said, let me stop.